All right. And we're back. It's COMP123, that's Programming 2, Summer 2016, that's Centennial, and it's week 11, part 2. We've just finished talking about how to make a form. That's what we've done so far. How to make a form that actually lists data from a database. We've connected to a database and done that. We've got a form that actually pops up that allows me to enter some data. You know, like example, if I want to marry Smith with a pseudo number, whatever it's going to be. But if I click submit, I haven't got any functionality. Cancel brings me back to the original form, but I want to use this data to access the form, right? And there's different ways of doing this. The first thing is we have to think about how do I connect to the database. And we're going to get back to this. I'm going to take a pause on design and go back to a little bit more theory about link, because we need to understand link a little bit, because we're going to use something called link to connect and do our queries to the database, right? Let's go back. So I have up online, I put this PowerPoint presentation up for today, and there's a couple of them actually. One of them is, if I go to 11, is part 1, which is all about link. Let's talk about link for a second. So we can't do data without link, right? And actually, one of the things we're going to talk about again is the whole list structure. Remember I talked about how lists are really important because, you know, we've been using them, we kind of used them for one of our, you know, assignment number 4 was an opportunity for you to use lists. And I kind of did it on the exam, and some of you had real trouble with it, right? And then, you know, we're back to lists again, right? Lists are used everywhere, right? So we're going to talk about that. So first we're going to understand what link is, right? And then we're going to start looking at how do I query data with link? And the data we're going to query right now is just in an array, right? But the form is what's really, really important. Okay, we've been talking about, you know, we're going to be talking about a language called, you know, SQL, T-SQL we're going to be using, right? SQL, to access the database, right? And you guys should know SQL. I'm not going to go into what that is, you know, because that's something that you guys should know from your database stuff that you've been working on, right? But link is something new we're going to use. It's called language integrated query, right? And it's an easier way to do, you know, queries as opposed to doing it the way we've been normally doing it when we use SQL. All right, let's take a look. So here's an example. I'm just going to make this a little larger. So I'm going to look at this code with you now. Here's an example of some code. I have to use the system.link namespace. In the system.link namespace, it gives me some different capabilities. One of them is I want to access this array. There's an array of values, 2, 9, 5, 0, 3, blah, blah, right? Okay. What I want to do is I want to say this. Here's my var. And if you see var, you're like, hold on a second. We're not doing JavaScript. We're doing C#. I think I've talked about this. Var is a implicit way of creating variables, right? Not explicit. Explicit being giving it the data type. What var does, it says, I don't know what data this is. If it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, help me figure out a C# in the compiler what this data is about. And if I say, well, in this particular case, this variable called filtered, we're going to use this select statement, but the select statement is going to use something called link syntax. So here's how it goes. It says, we need to use a from. That's the first thing we start with link, right? Say from value. This is like almost like a for each. In values. So there's values, right? There's our values. For every value in the value list, this is the value list, where my value is greater than 4, that means not including 2 or 0 or 3 or 1 or anything like that, or even 4, right? I want to select value. I want to select the value, all the values that where my value is greater than 4. Okay, and it's going to basically return all this the values in a list or an array that hits our filtered variable. So our filtered variable is actually a list, right? And then, as an example, I can also do another one. Here's another query, right? My sorted variable from my value in values, order by value, right? Order by my value, and then select it. So it's going to just ascending order, the default ascending order. That's what it's going to do. Order by value. You can also say ascending or descending if you really want to. Okay, here's another one. from value in filtered. Well, that's interesting. Filtered is actually an array too. Remember, we just made an array called filtered, right? From value in filtered, order by value, descending. So I want to kind of do the descending way, and then select my value, and then kind of have the results in sorted filtered results. So this is a great way of getting a list of values, right? A list of values from a database. If I want to get stuff from the database, like what the data grid view is doing right now. The data grid view is going to the database and saying, hey, database, from students, my students list, that's what's happening, right? When I get my students list, from my students list, I want you to pull down all my students in a list, right? Where my students is equal to all students, where students, right? Or order by students and select students. So basically give me all the students in alphabetical order, right? That's what's happening. So I have every student that I want. I'm not saying give me just some students. Give me all the students, right? And then when I take those students, I want to populate them onto my data grid. That's what's actually happening. My data grid is just showing a list, right, of values that are coming from the database. That's what's happening. And it's doing it automatically for me. So link, what it does is it helps us create the query. That's what it does. Helps me create the query. All right. So it's a link namespace. That's what we have to use. We talked about this. Again, the from clause is the first piece of link. Okay. Again, which specifies a range variable, which is the value in this case, and a data source to query, which in this case is values. So for every value, it values. For every student in students, in the students database, the students table. For every professor in the professors list, you know, whatever it's going to be. It's like almost like doing a for each statement, right? And that's what it says here, right? So I'm looking at for each item in the list is what I'm saying. From each item in the list, do something. And then what I want to do is I'm going to say here's the filter, where this student is equal to this, or order by this particular way, right? So those are the two things I want to do. Then what I want to do finally is say something like, okay, select that student. Give me the students in that meet all these criteria. That's what the query is, right? And the select statement, what it does, it basically says, return everything that I've just asked for back into the variable and create a list of values that match this stuff that I've just asked you to do. That's what it's doing. So link is a really nice way of querying the database where we don't have to use some ugly selection statements that doesn't make any sense. You don't have to put capitals. You don't have to use query language in any way. It's a really quick way to do that, and it returns something that's in my opinion, a little bit more contextual when it comes to C#, easier for us to use because it's all lists. If you know lists, you know link, right? And we'll talk about this in a second. Okay, so this order descending and ascending. One of the things to know is that each of our arrays or collections, right, depending on what they all have this, they're all implementing something called the IEnumerable interface. We talked about interfaces before. Remember I put the I in front of the interface to indicate that it's an interface? So IEnumerable is just the enumerable interface, right? Enumerable means that, you know what, we can treat these items that are IEnumerable as lists or as something that I can iterate over, right? For example, all the data that I get from my database table, it has several fields. So each of my items, each record in my database, right, is what actually it is an element in my list. The element is taking the form of a student. The student has several fields. Think about the student as a class. My class is student. I have a student ID. I have a student name, first name. I have a student last name. I have a student number. That's part of my class, student, right? I'm ordering my table by that way. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say something like this. I have to access my database, and I'm going to say whatever my student is, right? My name for my student, I want to make the database equal to that. Okay, we're going to get back to this. So IEnumerable says I can list each record in my database table, right? And that's what each one of these things are. They're like an array. or a list, more like a list than anything else. Okay, let's go back to the next piece. I'm not going to talk about iComparable in a second. Let's take a look at this code here. Here we go. I've got another example, right? So I've got my employee. Here's my employee. This is perfect. This is like student, right? My first name, my last name, and my monthly salary. Notice that first, last, and salary, right? I'm getting from my employee constructor. Here it is. From my constructor, my first name is going to become my first name. My last name is going to become my last name, and so on. So as I enter my constructor, it fills in the properties of my employee class. Cool. Then I have a couple of methods. One of them is the monthly salary method. All right, the monthly salary method actually has the ability for me to return or get and set my monthly salary property. It's an access method, right? So it's a decimal, type decimal, and it actually gets me to set or get my monthly salary, whatever that is, right? I also have overridden my toString method, which you see before. This is all stuff we've done before, right? Okay, cool. So we've got the employee class. Okay, take a look at this. Just like we would normally set up a range of tables in or a range of records in a database table, I do the same thing. I created an array. Here's an array, the array style, of employees. And each employee is an anonymous employee, new employee. I'm not actually naming this employee. And I'm using this curly brace syntax is initializer syntax, right? And I'm saying, well, you know what? The first employee is Jason, red. That's his color. And then they make, 5,000 M, which means probably some $5,000 a month, monthly salary, right? And I enter all the other employees inside the list, or the array, which is called employees, right? Okay, cool. Now that I have an array or a list, whatever, any kind of enumerable kind of thing, if it's an array or some kind of collection, I can use link to query it, right? So I can go back to link, and I can say something like this. Okay, so here's my variable between 4K and 6K. From E, this is the short form, I wouldn't use E, in employees, for employee and employees, where an employee monthly salary is greater than 4,000 a month, 4,000 decimal, and my monthly salary is less than 6,000, between that range, right? I can do that. I can use a proper condition here. That's a condition, a conditional statement. Select this employee. And I return that employee back to between 4K and 6K. So 4K and 6K, this variable has a list, or an array, if you will, of employees that match this criteria. That's what happens. Then I can iterate through the list, just like I normally do with a for each loop, right, to display all those employees. Okay? Again, it's important to understand the syntax before we go into details on how to use it with our database, because you're going to be using link for this, right, to access the database. And there's other examples here where it does the same thing. For every employee, it employees, select the employee last name and return a group of last name, a list of, so this is just returning all the last names in my list, right? That's a quick way of doing that, yeah. It can work with any data collection. I can work with arrays, I can work with lists, anything that holds data, I can use link for, right? Yes, you can do it the same way. But first, we have to understand the query language, the link language, the link syntax. Once I understand the link syntax, right? So here's what I need to do, and I'll leave you with this thought. I'm going to stop now, all right? Because I'm going to keep going, but I don't want to fill your mind full of link. Link, again, is just a methodology. We need a from statement with link. We need to include, first of all, system.link inside of our using statement, so we can access that namespace, the classes that are associated with link, right? And then what I can use is a from statement, maybe a where or an order by, and then a select. Once I've done those things, I can filter the list or collection that I'm looking at, whether it's an array, a list, or a database, because a database is still a collection of data, right? And then I can return it as an array. This is what this is. It's this array holds the results, right, of what I'm looking for. That's what I was looking. So this basically is my query, and this holds the results of my query. In this case, I'm looking just for all the employee last names, I don't know why I'd want to do that, but I could do that. It's very similar, but what it does is it makes it a little easier for us to, a list of last names. It's a list of last names, right? I can't do anything with this list right now. I can't go back to the database and change the list the way it is right now. Okay, here's something else. So here's another one. So I'm going to select my first and last names. Okay, so from employee in employees, select, here's something, an object that has a first name and last name, right? First and last. It's a new object. That's my select name. So return, you know, every employee that has, so select first and last names of every employee. That's what this is going to do. That's another way of writing it. So link is really flexible in this way, and it allows us to return data from the database, but also allows us to write data to the database after we have our collection. One of the great things is that it allows us to, it acts like a list. So I can use the count method of the object that I'm getting back, right? I just want to go back down here and talk about, before we get into lists. Yeah. The next piece is all about lists and collections. And I want to stop here because we've already done lists. But what this does, the second part of this, of this PowerPoint, actually gives you all the details you need. Again, I'm just going over all the different things in the list because I noticed last time when I kind of introduced lists to you guys, you're like, some people didn't understand how to use lists. They didn't have enough detail, so I put it up here in this PowerPoint. So I want you to take that away. Take that away, link, how we use link to connect to the database. We're going to be able to do that, first of all. First of all, there's two pieces, two parts to it. One, I have to connect to the database. I have to open a connection to the database somehow, right? Number one. And two, after I connect to the database, right? After I connect to the database, I can read my database with link, right? Query the database with link. And then what I want to do is I want to use link, right, to insert data into the database, whether I want to add it to the end or find a record in the database and delete that record, right, from the database. Actually remove a record, right? So I'm able to do those things. I'm going to try and do this with you by next day, okay? And once we have full CRUD, I'll give you a little lab that you can putz around with and then get a little couple of percent. And then next week, I'm going to quiz you on link, how to do stuff with link and access the database and all that kind of stuff. Because this is the next piece. The next piece we're going to is all around data access. Okay. We're going to talk about exception handling as well, but we've already done that, right? We were talking about exception handling. Okay, questions. One thing to note. Please remember that next week, Monday, there's no class. Some people have, I mean, it's because of the long weekend. Monday's no class, yeah. So if you're, I know some people have forgotten, right? Which is going to make our classes a little short, your time scale a little bit shorter. It won't affect our class because our class up is on Tuesdays. But if you have classes on Mondays, remember that there will not be class on Mondays. So the JavaScript class we're doing won't be class next week. We are going to be we're going to be following things through. There's going to be a quiz next week for JavaScript, right? And we're going to be talking about this again because I'll talk about it tomorrow on the Wednesday. So people are doing this, but for this particular thing, we're going to be doing our quiz on the Friday, right? So next week's quiz for C# Friday, and we're also going to be doing a lab this Friday. That's probably going to be doing. I probably won't make it do Monday because Monday's the holiday. Maybe we'll make it do Tuesday. Just give you a couple days. Yes. Oh, that's a good question. If you can't make the database for yourself, there is, and I'll end with this. Sorry, guys, I'm running over. But if you look at DreamSpark, if I go to DreamSpark student software catalog, there is. I wonder if this is the best place to take you. No, I think the best place to go is E5 on the hub. So if I go to Centennial, and if I look at the Microsoft DreamSpark for Centennial, it's e5.onthehub.com, your web store for Centennial. You'll notice that you have a bunch of stuff in here, Visual Studio and everything else. There is something called SQL Server Management Studio, which is what you want to pull down, right? Management Studio. So if I go to SQL, if I go to servers, maybe it'll be in here. It is a free download for students. Just want to make sure that I give you the right information and I don't like give you the wrong information. That would be very bad. SQL Server Management Studio is what it's called. SQL Server Management. There it is. SQL Server Management Studio Express. That's not the one you want. You want this one. SQL Server Management Studio with Service Pack 1. This is a free download from DreamSpark, and what it allows you to do is if you pull up SQL Server Management Studio, you can connect, just like we did with Visual Studio, to the database. So remember, it was called LocalDB projects V13, right? Or V12 in your case. You connect, and then you see the same stuff in here, but the great thing is, if I look at databases, here's my COMP123, here's my tables, right? My students, and I can actually look at things like, I can open this table right up, right? Design the table, edit the top 200 rows, you know, do a bunch of stuff in here. It's more, you have more control with this than anything else, right? Yeah, like for example, I want to edit the first 200 rows. Of course, I get an exception when I do that. But SQL Server Management Studio allows you to create rows and do stuff. You do the data with the rows a lot easier, right? If I want to select the top 1,000 rows, it'll actually show me all the data. There's all the data. And down in here, you can see that I can physically go in here and change the data in the row and click execute. And when I do that, I can add a new row of data in here if I really want to. Here's the results. I can go in here and change the data as well. Okay, so SQL Server Management Studio is the other way to do it. But I recommend that if your Visual Studio is not working properly, fix your Visual Studio, because this is what is much easier for you to use. It's one tool. And again, all I'm doing here is I have these options. And if you don't have all these options, you may want to take a look at your tools, extensions and updates. And there might be an extension you need to download. For example, if I go to all, installed updates, and if I go SQL, right, you can see that, okay, how about server? No, there are a bunch of extensions and updates that you can download for your Microsoft database. Just going to see where that is. But there is one that's in there for your database, and it could be something that you have to update Visual Studio. So check out if there's updates over here. Like I still have 2 updates. And this one here, Visual Studio Update 3, I'm not doing yet, but I will. But under online or installed, you may want to check something like, do you have a Microsoft? If I go Microsoft, I think it's a Microsoft installation. Microsoft.NET Core Tools. There's one that's in here that's required for your database. Might be database tools. Let me see database. Database. No. Of course, you know, it's just not working the way I wanted to. Yeah, there was something that I loaded in here, but basically what there is a tool, there's an extension, and if you don't have it in, then it won't work properly. So please take a look under tools maybe, and that's what gives you the extra stuff that you can do with the database. Anyways, guys, that's it for me this week. I've already gone over. Please, this day. We'll get together again on Friday. Remember, Friday I'll give you a lab, and we'll do the rest of the crud of what I want to do with Visual Studio and our SQL Server and Link. Okay, thanks.